Good evening. The Prime Minister of Luxembourg has attacked Boris Johnson's approach to Brexit, calling the situation a nightmare and saying that the British government has failed to put forward any serious proposals for a new deal. Xavier Bettel also accused Boris Johnson of portraying the EU as the bad guy. His outspoken comments came at what was supposed to be a joint press conference following Mr Johnson's first face-to-face meeting since taking office with the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. But Boris Johnson pulled out of his media appearance because of noisy protests from Remain supporters nearby. However, he told the BBC that while negotiations had reached a very difficult moment, there was still a good chance of a deal. Well, our political editor, Kuenssberg, is in Luxembourg tonight. Laura.
Sophie, there's always been an element of choreography and theatre around this whole now 3-year-long Brexit process. But if Boris Johnson came to Luxembourg today imagining that there'd be some kind of happy ending, well, he was wrong, very wrong. He believes he wants a deal, but he can't get a deal if the EU isn't willing to budge. And today there weren't much signs of movement. A dramatic day, but a day with a conclusion that doesn't hold much promise.
Air miles can't be exchanged for a deal.
Today is not going to be a breakthrough day.
Time for Boris Johnson to see some of those he needs on side.
I mean, it's September already, and you moved into number 10 in July, and it's only now you're going to see Jean-Claude Juncker. You could have done this weeks and weeks ago.
We have had many conversations with our friends and partners, and they've moved a long way.
But a jet and a convoy racing through Luxembourg streets doesn't mean we're speeding towards an agreement.
I think a deal is there to be done, but clearly, if we can't get movement from them on that crucial issue of whether the EU can continue to control the UK, we won't be able to get that through the House of Commons. No way.
But what is the actual solution that you're proposing? I mean, is it giving more power to Stormont, for example?
These are certainly some of the ideas that are being talked about. This is all doable. It's all doable with energy and goodwill. There's a germ of an idea there.
But it's just the germ of an idea.
And so, well, there's a lot of thinking going on.
If it's down to goodwill, there's big trouble. A small crowd making a lot of noise was outside Boris Johnson's meeting with Luxembourg's leader.
Hey, Boris, leave our rights alone.
Having tried and failed to move it inside, number 10 chose to leave rather than appear before the crowd. But Xavier Bettel didn't miss the moment. Maybe even savoured it.
It's on Mr Johnson. He holds the future of all UK citizens. It's been a decision from a party, it was a decision from David Cameron to do it. They decide, I deeply regret it, but don't put the blame on us.
However many handshakes there are, if the two sides can't even agree peacefully on the choreography of a press conference without drama, what chance really of an accommodation between the UK and the EU?
We're cautious.
Especially when at home, Boris Johnson is in conflict with Parliament.
Has there been a total breakthrough? I wouldn't say so. Am I more optimistic than I was when we took off this morning? I would say a little bit, but not much.
MPs have changed the law to try to stop you taking the UK out without a deal at the end of October. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you propose to get round that? Because you keep saying you've got no intention of delaying.
I won't. Look, here's what I won't. I will uphold the Constitution. I will obey the law, but we will come out on October the 31st.
Well, how if the MPs have changed the law to stop you doing that?
We're going to come out on October the 31st,
but
and it's vital that people understand that the UK will not extend. We won't go on remaining in the EU beyond October 30th. What on earth is the point?
But that means that you are looking for a way round the law. I mean,
well, you know, those are your words. What we're going to do is come out on October the 31st, deal or no deal, and staying in beyond October the 31st is completely crackers.
But do you really think that you want to be the kind of Prime Minister that is looking of ways of sneaking around the law to keep to your political promise? I mean, everybody knows how strongly you feel.
These are all your words.
But how will you do it then?
Well,
will you challenge it in court? Will you take Parliament to court to stop yourself?
Our first priority, if I may say so, just to try and look on the bright side for a second or two, is to come out with a deal. And actually, that is what our friends and partners in the EU would like too. And I think that they've had a bellyful of all this stuff.
It looks like a wonderful restaurant.
Many British Prime Ministers have sat alongside him before, trying to finesse or find a new relationship with the EU. But this one is happier to provoke, happier to try to find a way round.
It does seem, since you've been in office, that some of the things that you have done, you seem to believe the conventions and rules somehow don't apply to you.
Really? Well, I humbly, respectfully disagree. If you're talking about having a Queen's speech, I think that was the right thing to do. We need a Queen's speech. And by the way, all this mumbo jumbo about how Parliament is being deprived of the opportunity to scrutinise Brexit. What a load of claptrap. Actually, Parliament, I think, has lost about 4 or 5 days. And I think actually what the people of our country want is a little less of this sort of gloom.
One of the people who's extremely gloomy about what's happened is your old friend and rival and colleague David Cameron. Now, he says that the Leave campaign that you led lied. He said that you behaved appallingly.
I have the highest respect and affection and regard for him. He and I worked together for many years, and I think he has a legacy turning the economy around that I think he can be very, very proud of. So that's my view on Dave and what he's got to say.
He's been pretty brutal about you.
Well, really. I mean, you know.
Another Tory Prime Minister whose fate will be decided by our relationship with Europe. With time so short, the volume is going up as the clock ticks down. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC News, Luxembourg.
Well, let's speak to our Europe editor, Katya Adler, who is in Brussels for us tonight. Another extraordinary day, a very outspoken attack on Boris Johnson from the Prime Minister in Luxembourg. What do you make of his comments, what he had to say?
Well, Sophie, I think the key question tonight has to be whether that outburst from Luxembourg's Prime Minister is indicative of the EU just having enough and wanting to walk away from any more talks with the UK, with the Boris Johnson's government. But actually it's quite the opposite, because we had the Prime Minister today saying he wants to again step up the pace of those talks with the EU, and the response from the European Commission was, our door is open to you 24/7. This is not out of love for Boris Johnson's government. This is because long ago EU leaders decided that as long as there was a whiff of a hope of a Brexit deal, it served their purpose to remain engaged, whether or not they felt frustrated. And they do feel frustrated, Sophie, because although it's headline making, Xavier Bettel's comments today are not new in EU circles, at least behind closed doors. In off-the-record chats with European politicians and diplomats, they ooze exasperation at the Brexit process, that the uncertainty costs EU businesses dearly, that European governments are having to pay millions in preparing for a possible no-deal Brexit, at the fact that Boris Johnson keeps insisting that those EU-UK renegotiations on a Brexit deal are going swimmingly. He says they say not, that he hasn't put any concrete proposals on the table. The difference is, though, that most EU leaders, bar some notable exceptions, think it's better for them to keep any anger in secret and in private.
Katya Adler in Brussels, thank you. The Liberal Democrat leader Jo Swinson says her party would not go into coalition with Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn. Speaking in Bournemouth, where the Lib Dems are holding their annual conference, she also denies that her party is being anti-democratic in saying it would cancel Brexit outright. Ms Swinson previously supported another referendum on EU membership. Our chief political correspondent Vicki sent this report, which contains some flash photography.
Liberal Democrat conference isn't everyone's idea of fun.
Well, it's a real pleasure.
But this year some new recruits are throwing themselves into the whole experience.
Okay. Smile, but
6 former Labour and Conservative MPs have defected to the Lib Dems because of Brexit.
It's a breath of fresh air.
And there might be more to come. Yesterday the party agreed to revoke Article 50, cancelling Brexit altogether if it wins a general election. Leader Jo Swinson denies she's ignoring the referendum result.
It's about being straightforward and honest. I totally accept that lots of people won't agree with it, but I do think you have to stand up for what you think is right.
Do you spend much time talking to people who voted for Brexit, or are you not just in a Remain bubble?
Well, I get out and about and speak to people on the doorsteps, campaigning around the country, which I've done through the local elections, through the European elections.
Do you hear their anger? They're angry, a lot of them.
Well, I do, and I have those conversations.
There's a democratic issue here, isn't there? And you are being anti-democratic.
I don't accept that because we have a parliamentary democracy. There was a referendum, people voted to leave and the government's gone away to negotiate that, and a deal was put before Parliament. Parliament rejected that, including, by the way, many MPs who voted to leave.
The Lib Dems want voters to be in no doubt that they're against Brexit, but some think the new policy shift could harm the party's chances in its former stronghold.
I fear that actually taking the extremist position of going for revoke of Article 50 actually is counterproductive if we're trying to keep some of our Leave supporters in many constituencies, including in places like Cornwall and the southwest of England.
But Jo Swinson is focused on victory. She says in such volatile political times anything could happen, and she's aiming to be Prime Minister. She rejects any suggestion that she'd prop up another party.
I'm not going to support Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister because they're not up to the job. Our country deserves better. And in an election campaign, the country will have the chance to choose a better future.
The Lib Dem strategy depends on the next election being all about Brexit. As Boris Johnson tries to attract Brexiteers, Jo Swinson will be going all out to appeal to those who voted Remain. She's certainly aiming high, but there aren't many people who think she'll be the next Prime Minister.
She has come up with a bold plan, but no one can be sure whether it'll get them to their preferred destination. Vicki, BBC News, Bournemouth.